story of the Google Pixel is one of a lot of back and forth. At first, we saw the company try to tackle a smartphone competition that just did not work out with the Nexus, and so we went from this affordable approach into something more premium, as companies like Apple and Samsung were not having a problem in making a market for themselves within that realm. As a result, the Pixel was good in that it differentiated itself as a computational photography phone at a time when it was still new enough to be considered an innovation. Today, this is what you know as AI, and it allowed Google to stick to salvage old hardware for years and keep the cost of their phones down. It wasn't until the Pixel 6 series that the company really changed the approach. It was no longer an either flagship, premium, or affordable approach, but instead you could pick all three with the Pro, the Base, and the A series. Aside from minor tweaks, you could access Google's latest technology across the board, with the caveat that it was the latest only in Google's bubble. If anything, this new Pixel series is a bit more of that, but with some added choices that are pretty interesting. The only question left is if it's worth it to pay as much for this as it is for the products that offer more, at least in numbers. I'm Jaime Rivera with Pocket Now, and it's time for our extended review. I guess the best way to start this review is by disclaiming that I've spent most of my time with the Pixel 9 Pro XL. My experience using the Pixel 9 pretty much indicated what to expect from the 9 Pro, with the exception of things like cameras and RAM, as those two phones even share the same phone cases. The Pro XL is really where the story is at, because we hadn't seen the company define the large variant as an XL in a bit now. When it comes to hardware, I think it's easy to say that these are the company's best Pixels ever. From the shiny rails to the symmetrical cuts all over, this phone is elegant, beautiful, and at the same time, it's kind of polarizing. I'm not gonna lie, I love the symmetry of absolutely everything, but yes, it looks like an iPhone from the front. From the back, you can surely differentiate the product, but man, this camera hump is large. It protrudes so much that it's almost like stacking half of another phone on top in thickness, but at least the pill design saves it from wobbling on a table. And also, by the way, if you were to remove the step design on the iPhone, it's almost as thick, if not the same thickness. Overall, I'm not going to call this phone light by any means, but I do feel that it does a better job at weight distribution than any of its predecessors, which for me is a big deal. Probably one of the most important changes with this device comes on the display, because we've seen the company tout their Actua displays for a couple of years, but I can't say I felt the improvements until now. Pixels would struggle with their ability to balance light whenever you were in a harsh scenario, but that's gone. Whether it's really dark or crazy bright, the screen is fully usable, and color reproduction is on point for content consumption. Now, the dual firing speakers are not necessarily the most balanced out there, but they are loud enough for you to notice a difference if you don't muffle them. Bet you won't tell the difference. And everything else, from colors to viewing angles to everything you'd want from a flagship display, you'll be just fine with Pixel 9. The biggest problem with the Pixel continues to be really internals, and that's mainly because of Tensor, now in its G4. And listen, it's better than before, but its computational prowess is no longer a selling point. We do know there's a broader vision coming up, but it's not on these phones. That being said, these devices do have as much RAM as you want for AI tasks, and the battery is also decent. You've got the latest forms of connectivity as well, but then the problem is that at this price, 128 gigs of storage is genuinely too little. I can't remember the last time that I bought so little storage for my mirrorless camera, for example. So that alone makes the Pro name sound poorly addressed, and sure, I know Apple does this as well, but if Google wants to compete, they need to pull a Samsung and double the storage, like seriously. And once you get into the software experience, a lot of these concerns go away. Google has done an amazing job at tuning Tensor in a way that allows this phone to feel buttery smooth in how it approaches Android 14, because yes, this is the first Pixel that does does not launch with the latest version of Android. Still, I do like the minor improvements, like the company working on the grid in a way that makes it more comfortable for you to load your favorite widgets on top and be able to make it yours. Sadly, at a glance, it's still a widget you cannot remove, but hey, it can't all be perfect. Other than that, I do feel that this phone is adequately performant in what Google sells it for, which is the AI experience. As such, we get to see new tricks that I consider mostly invaluable. The screenshots application, for example, has spared me from looking in my phone's gallery for basics, for example. Now, I did try to hold this review for Pixel Studio to be complete and start allowing humans in the imagery as we saw in the demos back in the hands-on, but no, it's not available, and I did want that because it's almost a Photoshop replacement. But yeah, you are going to have to wait. Otherwise, the benefit of going pro with Pixels this year is your free access to Gemini Advanced for a year. It's been great to test it before you have to pay $20 a month, which I feel is pretty steep, and in its current state, I will tell you, I did find it to be very useful. Gemini Live alone is insane in how well it can handle a conversation with you. The problem is that in its current state, it can be unreliable sometimes. So again, I'm glad that I'm able to test it before having to pay for it, which I doubt I will. Now, in absolutely everything else, the experience of using this phone has exceeded my expectations. Battery life is far better than before, even when you're not using the phone at night. I won't call it a 2-day phone, but a reliable workhorse during the day for sure. Phone calls are another thing that I feel this company has done really well, as I do consider that callers will now hear you far better than they did before. And the same can be said about connectivity, which I do feel that this phone has finally been tuned in a way where it does cling onto data better than its predecessors. Now, obviously, the biggest selling point for these devices is photography, now that we have the same capabilities regardless of the size, and in that sense, you could say that you get some improvements in specs, but not necessarily the ones a lot of people were expecting. Some sensors have been here for years in typical Google fashion, which I know may concern some when it comes to longevity, but I think what's most important is what you buy and the results. In that regard, it's interesting that the contrasty photos we've known Pixels for have been toned down. It could just be that Google is pushing the highlights a bit higher to make the photos more pleasing for everyone and not just photography nuts like us. And in all fairness, yeah, I do consider that the results are pretty good. And that's regardless if you're using the ultra-wide primary or also the telephoto. Even up to 30x, this phone can truly push detail through software here after the fact, and all these photos are pretty usable, which not all competitors can claim, even with extra camera sensors and more megapixels and everything you could think of. And when it comes to low light, this is actually when you're going to notice more of the extra contrast that we've been used to before. Photos sometimes seem too good to be real. It's like if you edited them on Snapseed, where even the skies are not as dark as your eyes saw them in the moment. If you're going for accuracy, this is really not your phone, but if you like interesting pro tricks, then this is, because I love things like action pan and long exposure, which are all modes and not an invitation to go crazy on manual controls. This is one of the reasons I do consider these to be some of the best pro phones out there. And then another reason why I love these Pro Pixels even over the 9 Pro Fold is the selfie camera. We're back to getting an ultra wide that performs fantastic. I seriously wish every phone had this feature, particularly every Pixel, but right now you can only get it on these two phones. So yeah, it's really great for group shots or even if you want to take a selfie of more than just yourself. It's made it really hard for me to stop using this phone even up to portraits. Though yeah, I do notice that they aren't handling borders as well as they did before. Clearly there is some tuning left to be done. Now, when it comes to video, I still consider Pixels to be the closest to an iPhone. Clearly, Google has tuned Tensor to give it more bitrate, which helps in quality, but sadly, it's still not perfect. Once you start introducing contrast, you'll notice that the darker scenes are going to introduce grain, and not the good kind. It's almost like digital distortion, which only gets worse at night. I do enjoy stabilization regardless of what focal length you're using, and even when you switch to the selfie camera, which you'll notice is extremely pleasing in results but also has the same contrast problems. And then there's the problem that I would have been willing to give this phone a harder try just because of that ultra-wide lens for video on the selfie, but no. Somehow that incredibly useful feature, particularly for video, is disabled. Oh well. Anyways, to conclude, what can I say? It's hard to deny that I truly have enjoyed my experience using this Pixel 9 Pro XL, even if it's not necessarily the best Android phone by the standards of most people. Usually Android users are looking for the most powerful flagship that has the best chip and the most horsepower, but in that end, that's only as important as how well the product executes on that capability. If we're honest, most of these competing flagships don't necessarily take full advantage of all their chips, and with the Pixel 9 Pro XL, that's not necessarily the case. This phone does achieve a lot of the premises that it offers. Surely, a few of the AI features are still a work in progress, but hey, at least it's some of it and not most of it. Obviously, the question is if you should get one, and if so, which one? I would say I love the fact that you now have more variety. In the past, you had to stick to larger flagships to get the best of everything, but now you don't. Hey, if my eyesight wasn't where it is, I'd pick the smaller Pro, but yeah, 40s and reading glasses go together, so that's the reason I'm using the XL. I just highly consider going for more storage, as all these AI capabilities have made apps beefier. It's, again, not the best Android phone, but if I were to pick between a smarter phone and horsepower, seriously, I'd prefer practice over theory. Let me know if you agree with our assessment in the comments down below, and while you're at it, follow us on social media and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. You can also follow me on my personal handles to see me finally love a Pixel again for the first time in years. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like what you saw. I'm Jaime Rivera, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.